Hello, hello, and welcome to American Zarathustra. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry, we're a tiny bit late, but we are here. You know, it's called Fashionably Late. So I'm here today with two amazing guests. But let me introduce the topic before I introduce my guests. The right wing has generally given up hope on the arts as leftist territory, and not without good reason. However, this plays into their purpose to sever us from our history, to mute our voice in the cultural landscape. However, lately, there's been more and more attention to the arts in our political sphere as we understand more how we need to reach the hearts and minds of our people, how facts and data have failed to give us control of our own narrative. So, with the presence of various publishing platforms, the White Art Collective, and numerous individual projects by several people in our sphere, including RPG games, comics, fiction, film, and so on, our movement is turning a new corner, looking inward toward our cultural health. In tonight's conversation, we're going to look at the obstacles to understanding the arts within our socio-political sphere and how we can overcome it. And with that, I would like to introduce my two esteemed guests, Jerome Schmitt. How are you today, Jerome?
I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. You know, we put the fashionably late.
Nice, nice. Oh,
I had to get that in there. So
you just killed it, dude. You just killed it. Okay.
That's the end of the show. I think.
And good night. And our other fashionably late guest, Josh Neal, my old friend. Josh Neal, how are you, sir?
Yeah, sorry, as the resident Italian on the panel, I had to do my ethnic duty and make sure we start on time.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I want to just tease the audience a little bit. There is a very major announcement coming from the White Art Collective, something that has never happened before in our sphere, and it is really big and really special. And I will just say that it is an IRL event that occurred, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jerome and Josh in real life. So that was a really awesome experience. We're not going to tell you what it is yet. We're going to kind of tease that out, but there will be a lot of word about that in the coming 2 weeks before the big announcement comes. So talking about the arts right now is actually quite the perfect time for that. So I'm really, really pleased. It was great to meet you guys.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I have to say, you looked exactly how you sound.
See, that is so funny to me, for me to hear that. Like, I often wonder what people think I look like. Nullis he told me, I think you're a redhead. And I'm like, nope, I'm not. My grandma was. I have some red in my beard, you know, from my Irish grandma, but I don't know what my voice looks like. Poor Mama P, she thinks I look like Rutger Hauer. I'm sorry I had to disappoint her, but anyway, yeah. So it was just phenomenal meeting you guys, and hopefully in the future we can do more of these in real life meetups, and everybody listening to the show should be endeavoring to develop communities, friendships, groups that are local and not just online. Community building is massive. It's extraordinarily important. And the arts bring us together in that way too, you know? Anyway, I guess we'll just jump right into this here. So I'll just kind of go through the questions, and then we may look at some artwork and talk about it, but we'll just kind of go with the flow. And then at the end of the show, I'm going to play a little music. So the first question for you both, the link between an intense focus on the over commodification of art and not creating art so as to not contribute to said commodification. I don't know if that came across well. Jerome, do you want to clarify that question a little better?
Sure, yeah. I mean, well, let me start it off by saying this, for example, in a way that people listening can probably understand. Like, say within the online kind of quote unquote dissident sphere, for example, Anybody that tries to earn a living or get by within this, so that they can do whatever it is they're doing, is seen as grifters, and donating one dime toward anything is seen as basically I don't want to. This is YouTube, but it's like something that only a certain tribe would do, things like that, because they see it being successful on the opposite side, right? So therefore, it's just inherently bad, right? So in terms of art, which, my biggest passion is, say, film, which is probably that film and music are the two most heavily commodified forms of art, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, people just kind of scoff at it and run away from it, because anything that's commodified is therefore bad and pointless and serves no purpose, even though it all completely serves a purpose. So therefore, they just don't really do anything. They don't create anything, and they don't try to put it out there or sell it or whatever, or get funding or whatever it is, because only the bad people do that. Create anything or sell it or whatever, or get funding or whatever it is, because only the bad people create anything.
I'm sorry, a little echo there. Yeah, that notion of like, I really don't know where this idea comes from, that artists aren't supposed to make a living from what they do. I'm a professional artist. I've been a freelancer and an art teacher for 20 years. So it's upsetting to me that people have some crazy notion that we're just supposed to be, I don't know, just floating in the ether and living off of the fumes of the oil paint or something. I don't know, it's absurd, But anyway, I don't want to cut you off, Jerome.
Well, I think, for example, the people can be disgusted by insert any director or big actor's name, and they'll make 10, 15, 20, 25 million a film. And that can be quite a turnoff to a lot of people. So therefore, the reaction is like, they shouldn't make anything.
That's silly.
Well, it is. And it's,
yeah,
it is silly. But again, it just causes them to turn away from these kind of art forms and not participate in the consumption of them, or think that anyone should really produce anything within that medium anyway, which only hurts us. I mean, essentially what this comes down to is that all the reasons that all the excuses one can make to think that our people shouldn't be participating in these artistic mediums or industries, what they're really saying is, hey, I'm going to hand over the myth making to my opposition and just leave it to them.
Ooh, that's chilling just to think of it, but that's where we're at.
That is where we're at. I mean, myth is what drives society forward. You want to start a war? Well, you need to create myths before that in order to coax the society into supporting it. You want to push governmental policies that will end up getting supported. You need to create the myths that can sometimes take years in order to get those things passed, which are things we're seeing now. I mean, policies and rhetoric we're seeing now took years and decades of myth making to get us to that point. And film, art, books, all those things worked in conjunction with one another in order to push those myths forward.
Yeah. So let's clarify what you mean by myth here, meaning a falsehood or sort of ancient myths. I just want the audience to know what you mean.
That's kind of a big question, because I would say it actually doesn't really matter if it's real.
Okay.
Because
I hear you. I understand.
Yeah.
That.
But the thing is also, who are the myths for? So do we have any myths that are being created in order to moralize us and push us toward X, Y, and Z? Not really, and we're giving the game away on that front. People lament like white liberals and things like that. Well, I mean, they bought into the new myths.
Yeah. Well, bought into. I feel that's just, this is my 2 cents. I don't know how to say this. They were duped into it, I feel, rather than bought into it. Like, they were tricked. They were hoodwinked. And they, if they were maybe a little higher IQ and read a book once in a while, that we wouldn't be where we are, maybe. I mean, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice, people. So
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, for starters, I think it's a quick time to just shine a little light on Mark Brahman and his myth-making project. I think that people really, really owe it to themselves to spend some time looking up the ApollonianTransmission.com and get acquainted with his ideas. It certainly informs the artwork I make, the Imperium art that I make. But I don't want to get too far off track with that. I just want to also add quickly before I give the mic over to Josh, that the things you're talking about have been a thread throughout several of the last few Imperium art shows. So, this idea of art as identity and us using our arts and our art community to create our identity, to kind of, I don't know how to say it. It's not that we're creating it per se, but in a sense we are, though, because we're under pressure of a new paradigm, a new time where, the cornerstone of our arts is awareness of or response to white genocide. And so there's a million different mediums and styles, and there's no, one style. It's not like, futurism or cubism or impressionism. There's many styles. So, but they all come from one core root, which is that love of the white race and the saving of the white race. So anyway, let me kind of pass the mic over to Josh and let him respond to the question.
Would you mind tossing me that question again?
So as I have it here, the link, what is the link between an intense focus on over-commodification of art and not creating art to not contribute to said commodification?
Yeah, so I remember, hopefully this relates, it did pop in my head as I was listening to Jerome speak. Many years ago, I met with this record producer, studio engineer. It was me and a guy I was writing songs with. And in one of the first sessions, he said to us, and it's something that has always stuck with me, and I didn't even really, hold on a second, I got weird things turning on in the background. Hold on.
So this is where we would insert the music, time.
But yeah, I didn't understand it at first. I found it to be really baffling, and that's probably part of the reason why I still remember it. He said, he worked with hundreds, maybe thousands of artists over his long career, and the one kind of consistent thing he always found was that like when it came down to actually working together, writing and recording, that none of these people really ever wanted to succeed.
They didn't want
to succeed for whatever reason. I don't think he ever got into the
bizarre,
the psychology of it per se. And maybe he had his own kind of insights into it. He's like, listen, most people don't actually want to do the things that they claim they want to do. And they'll throw up all these various different reasons. And I was like, this is so insane. Because at that point I had worked, what I thought was so hard to get to that position.
Yeah. And
I just couldn't fathom throwing yourself into something wholeheartedly and not wanting to take that. It's that one last step, really. And so I kind of view, and to bring it back to the question, I kind of view that I don't want to contribute to cheapening art, man. Is just like another manifestation of, well, I'm not really serious. I have some personal issue, some kind of crisis that really going all in would force me to confront that crisis, and I don't have the ability to do that. And so I'm not going to. I don't really think that there's anything more to like the anti-commoditizing or commodifying aspect. That is something to be examined in its own right, but on like a more kind of foundational level, it's just one of many reasons or excuses or things that people will throw up because they're not really serious about, well, in this case, the cause, right? If you want to take that principle out, they're not serious about whatever thing that they're doing. But to put it in the context of this conversation, they're not really serious about advancing kind of political art in a right-wing identitarian way. They're not really serious about seeing the people that they enjoy on the internet, wherever they might be doing. They're not really serious about seeing them succeed or get to the next level. They're not really serious about themselves participating in this, and I think there's a whole lot of reasons why a person might feel that way. Not worth trying to play mind reader and figure that out, but on a fundamental level, without just repeating myself. I mean, it's just that unwillingness to put up or shut up. It's a revealed preference. Like these people will say all the time, like, gosh, this is really so important to me. Gosh, we really need to, do X, Y, Z or advance this, that, or the other cause. And then when the obvious solution or the obvious first step is presented, their revealed preference is it's right out there in the open. They don't want to do it. So, I mean, what people say and what they want to do are two different things. There's a real final quick thought. Sorry.
Okay.
I think it intertwines a little bit with this idea. I guess I'll agree with Jerome that people ought to be doing this stuff for free because of this idea of like, it's something that you're passionate about. But even it's just like one of these obstacles that people throw up that I don't really think have a lot of weight behind them.
Yeah, I think the notion of, being underground and, sticking it to the man and all that is kind of a leftist attitude. I think we should be, and Nietzschean about this. We should be like bold as hell and just go full throttle and take over the entire country, and go full throttle. So I don't know. I suppose that what this reveals, this particular question, is how the right wing has to somehow divorce itself from the left wing paradigm or way of thinking about things. And maybe not that we have to be exactly, the opposite of everything they are, but that we just have to claim our own approach to this. And the White Art Collective is doing that, but there's no guidebook to do that. It's just kind of happening, and we're all excited about it and working together to try to accomplish that. So that echoes back to this big announcement that's coming out soon. But again, we'll leave that. So I'll move on to the next question then. When does critique end and creation begin? Does the dissident right or the white positive sphere focus too much energy on the meaninglessness, the blandness of modern art? When we this is a discussion about art. So you just bring up the word art and people right away kind of think of modern art, and they, like the MoMA in New York City or some weird object that doesn't make sense or is vaguely offensive or something like that. Do we focus too much on that? When does critique of art end and creation begin? These are actually kind of two different questions, but I'm going to let Jerome lead.
Yeah. Well, first off, there is much to critique within modern art, but first you have to realize, not all that's modern is bad. There is some good modern architecture. There is some good modern paintings. Film is a modern medium. It's not a traditional medium or anything like that. So there's some just weird definitions that I think go around that just serving again as an excuse for one to just kind of scoff at it all and just say fuck it. But so there's much to critique. So we look to a lot of thinkers. Like I always bring up, and Josh knows him very well, Mark Fisher's work, and then there's someone like David Foster Wallace. Two people that I think are brilliant. They really got things right with critiques. I think there comes to a point where you start digging yourself this deep black hole, though. Look how I always point to look how those two ended up. They met very unfortunate ends by their own hands. I think that there's an obsession with the negativity of it that leads towards a path of basically hopelessness, and not necessarily like your life's hopeless or anything like that, but just the field of art, and there's just nothing good out there, and we're being swallowed by all this offensive and mediocre and just flat out shit art.
Yeah.
Which I can understand the feeling, but people aren't going to really attempt to create in that, with that kind of like mental space that they put themselves in. Right. Mm-hmm. So obsessing over the best way to critique something and then build on that critique and build and build and build and build and build. It's just like, to what end? So it's the same thing when creating art. It's kind of like, what purpose is it? A friend of mine, he goes by the name MP Real on Twitter. He asked, who is the art made for? Which is something that I think creators should really ask themselves, not just beauty for beauty's sake, but who is the beauty made for? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. We need to start asking questions and things like that in order to start creating, instead of just critiquing ourselves into, once again, handing the myth making game away because we just think it's all inherently bad. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be the ones that are supposed to transform ourselves in order to transform these mediums, so that we can put something out there that can help others and moralize others. Right. So the thing, like, and this kind of goes back to what Josh was saying earlier, a lot of people, even if they have some talents, whether they're or good, they're not willing to transform themselves and bring themselves up to that next level. So instead it's, they'd rather just, obsess over the meaninglessness of all this art that's consumed, even though I would argue it's not meaningless at all, because it works, even if it's bad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So while we're discussing this, I'm showing cover art from one of the most popular contemporary art magazines called High Fructose. There's other ones, and this particular magazine has a focus on pop art, kind of contemporary pop art. There's like kind of video game art, and there's fine art, and there's conceptual art, and all kinds of things kind of mashed into it. We could go in many directions on this, but I'm essentially just kind of giving a little bit of eye candy while we have this discussion. I want to first off say everything you just said was freaking phenomenal and like so solid. And I think that acts as like the root of the conversation, that we have to get into the myth-making game. We have to control our narrative. But the key question I'll say that you've made here is, who is the art for? Now, there's a kind of I'm going to say this sort of a 50-50 thing. Now, artists, they had two ways of doing it, right? Of course, they make art for themselves, and that's thought of as the purist art, and then they make art for, say, a market. And I'm not even talking about like graphic design or commercial art per se. But if you look at High Fructose, or you look at any kind of gallery that sells art, etc., it's a business. It's making money. It's trying to appeal to a specific audience. Every gallery has different kind of styles of art. They host a certain stable of artists, as they call it. I love the word stable, as if you're cattle, and they keep you in their stable. But if you want a specific kind of art, you go to X gallery to get it. And it's kind of like if you want, vintage clothing, you go to X store to buy it. So people need to try to think through the relationship between art and the art market. How do those things interact with each other? And there's very many kinds. So if you're in the business of running a gallery and you have a $3,000 rent to pay, then you're going to need to hustle, and you have to. So there's a lot of pressure on artists to make art that fits the mold of a business, of a gallery, or a magazine, etc. And so that compromises their individuality, that compromises their politics, that compromises a lot, right? Their vision, etc. So, if they want to make a living at this, then how can they not be influenced by the market? Right now, you can be a sort of a loner and just do your thing and hope and pray maybe that somebody likes your work and will, buy it, or you'll get discovered. In the art world, they say you have two choices. You can be Van Gogh or you can be Picasso. And what that literally means is just what I was saying. Van Gogh being the loner who sold one painting in his life and died, miserably, but yet was a kind of like the spiritual epitome of the artist, like the mythic high level artist, which Van Gogh wasn't that great, but that's the myth that they propagate. Versus Picasso, who is this maverick. He had all kinds of women and big nice cars and mansions, and even his art was kind of maverick. Although he's not beyond critique. I could say a lot of things about him. He basically stole his style from African sculptures and things, but very few people know that. So it's a very, very interesting discussion, but I'm kind of hogging the mic here, so I think it's time to pass it over to Josh Neal.
Well, I would just say on the Van Gogh Picasso question, embrace the third position, Salvador Dali.
Ooh, nice. That's an interesting take right there. Salvador Dali.
I know they don't overlap. I know they're like what Dali was later than both of those guys, right?
Well, that's very sound.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, though, like futurism is actually associated with fascism, whereas surrealism, I don't know 100% what political affiliation that it has, but I like the way you're thinking. I like the way you're thinking a lot here. This is quite interesting.
On the original question of the line between criticism and creation, I guess just to make it relevant to the audience and to fold in Jerome's comment from before, I mean, who is this conversation for? Well, it's going to be for the alt-right or the American identitarian movement. So right. I'll speak to that. It does seem like you have two kinds of people that pass through this little community that we're in. And that's the kind of highbrow intellectual types, and then the creative types. And it does seem like they're two fundamentally different kinds of people. I don't want to name names, and I certainly don't want to create the impression that there's some kind of drama, but because there isn't, absolutely. But maybe on the critiquing intellectual side, you could say that they're engaging in a kind of poetry, but not really. Philosophy and poetry are like kissing cousins, but the critiquing brain is not the same, or the critiquing consciousness is not the same thing as like the creative consciousness. And I think for a few reasons, and this will probably seem very trite to say, but critiquing is it's externally focused because you're looking at objects in the world that other people created, and you're it's analytic, and creativity is like more of an internal reflective, maybe kind of a thing. Don't hold me to that. I'm not so sure I die on that hill per se, but there are two modes of consciousness. There are two attitudes. There are two different dispositions. And just thinking from my own point of view, whenever I made music, or the humiliatingly bad forays into painting that I used to do were not, it wasn't like I'm doing this to tear down some other artist or some other work of art or some other movement. It was like, hey, this is this thing I want to make. I'm going to water the plant. I want it to blossom and grow. It was not about kind of how it related so much to some other existing work. Maybe in an indirect way it was, but it was about the thing I was making and how I could nurture it, and how I could, almost like you would with a child, like how am I going to give it I want it to have the reins, but I want to be sculpting it, and critique is almost kind of egoistic in a way, where it really is about you as the person who's coming in and either putting the stamp of approval on some work, or you're dismissing it, and how do you bridge the two? I think broadly, people who are critics can't create, and I think every creator can critique. So there's one side is very impoverished. It's like the old saying, those who do, those who can't teach. Those who do, those who can't critique. Maybe in the world of art, that's true. So there's a whole lot of critique in this sphere. A lot of that having to do with like how Twitter operates and things like that. And I am not of the opinion that anybody can be a creative type. That if you just sit and you log enough hours behind a piano or a canvas, that you will make something that other people will actually want to support. But if I would encourage stepping away from that critical kind of consciousness to a creative one, if that's even possible.
Yeah. So I wanted to speak a moment to the question here, where does critique end and creativity begin? So I'm an art teacher, and I feel that I would really like to give just a brief lesson on critiquing art. That's the nature of this show. And I feel that if our people in our socio-political sphere are going to be culturally literate about our arts and art in general, then they should have some sense of how to critique art. As a teacher, I always boil it down. I simplify it down to two simple questions. What is it, and do you like it? And the first question informs the second one. If you can't explain what a work of art is, how do you know that you like it? And the more you understand it, the more you will know whether you like it or not and why. And so there's different variables involved in that, such as aesthetics, skill, and meaning, you see. So like something might show a lot of skill, or it might show no skill, but at the end you have to ask in the end, is it art? And so all of this comes together. Does it have the language art of art, whatever that is? If it's, of course, music, visual arts, poetry, they all have different kind of components, right? But to judge and critique all these things, I wanted to show you this thing called the Bloom's taxonomy of understanding. It's basically how the kind of cognitive pyramid of understanding things. So remembering something, recalling facts, basic concepts. If I talk about, let's say, tone and hue, well, what are those words? Okay, well, tone is how light and dark something is. Hue is how bright or dim something is in a color. So like, as colors go back in the distance, they fade in hue, right? Okay, that's just words, right? But we need the language in order to discuss it, understand it, appreciate it. Understanding, bingo. next one up, right? Being able to explain these concepts using the language. And then application. So this is where this is Jerome's question. Where does critique end and application or creation begin? So once you're kind of informed in that, and anybody in the chat who's at, say, the White Art Collective, or musicians, poets, artists, filmmakers, etc., each one of us knows our medium, right? We understand our medium. So this is where we take that understanding, that's kind of the technology of it, and then we apply it to whatever it is that we want to say. But while we're doing that, we have to analyze what it is we're doing. Does this sound good? Is this out of tune? Does this flow from the verse to the chorus and back? Does this look correct? Do these symbols make sense in relationship to each other? How's the pacing of this film? Is it working? Am I rushing through this? So we got to have that critical, sort of connecting the dots approach to things. Then we're going to sort of evaluate, yes, this is good. I've made a decision. I'm making a stand. I'm not stuck in the middle, because, like, I'll tell you, as a songwriter, I got piles of half-written songs. Maybe Josh can relate to that, or something, like the other people in the chat can relate. You have to kind of evaluate and then create. So the creation here, the whole process is creation. You see, it's all part of this, I don't know, if let's say you're going to build an airplane or something, or you have to understand the physics of flight and aerodynamics, and then you have to understand how to make all the parts work and come together. It's in a sense something like that. I'm making a pretty big analogy here, but I feel like those are the basic kind of tools that you need to go about your artwork. And so, as let's say, we're talking here kind of as artists, right? But we're doing it for people who are not artists to listen in and say, that's how it's done. And I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. I actually use this on my job, or I do this when I'm making a website, or I do this when I'm cooking a Thanksgiving dinner, or I'm doing, there's so many ways in which we apply this taxonomy of cognition to things that we do in ordinary life, even in relationships with other people. I'm at my office, and what's the power structure here? I have to understand, who I'm dealing with and things. That's stretching it a bit, but all of these things relate to understanding what it is that we're doing. So with that in mind, I think maybe we can look at some art. And if I could just kind of take you guys on a tiny little journey here into my own art portfolio on my website, I'd like to just kind of have you guys look at it and just do a little bit of critiquing. We're not going to focus the whole show on it, obviously, but I thought it would be fun for the audience, to have just a kind of a look at this and then let you guys jam on it. So I don't know, maybe Jerome, here's the two questions. What is it, and do you like it? And you don't have to feel compelled to say I like it. Just be honest,
The fucking thing sucks.
Right.
Fucking horrible.
I had a teacher in college. When I was a fine art student, she would say, I wouldn't wipe my ass with that. I was like, well, that was classy. Okay. But I mean, to a young artist who's trying to, grow, what a damaging thing to say to them, it's so cruel. But so what is it? What are we looking at?
Well, I like it. I mean, it seems a bit tragic to me in a very beautiful way. I mean, with the way that she's laying back and with the way that he's holding her, there's just, it looks like an immense amount of love, that this man has for her as he's holding her, given whatever the situation is. I'm not sure.
So imagine, let me interrupt you. Imagine I can't see this picture and you're describing it to somebody. That's when I say, what is it? Then just technically tell me what it is.
Technically?
Yeah, I don't see the screen right now. What is it that you're looking at? Describe it.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at some rocks with breaking waves upon the rocks splashing up, and we see a man holding his beloved. She looks either in despair or possibly she has passed away, and he is in tragic fashion embracing her, probably for the last time.
And what kind of medium is it?
It's a painting. I mean,
okay. So how do you know that she's the relationship between these two?
I'm really just going off of the angle of her body and how she's laying back and how he's holding her, down on his knees and with his head hanging over her body, which to me looks a bit melancholy. So there's some tragedy behind it in my eyes.
What's the relationship between them and the landscape?
Aesthetically, I mean, the colors are very matching. That's a lot of tans and kind of goldish hue with browns, and they really match with that. But at the same time, you have these jagged rocks and these breaking waves upon it, which we have no control over at all. And just like he has no control over what might have happened to this woman.
Do the rocks go on forever, or does it end?
No, they end into the sea. But the sea seems to go on forever.
It's kind of like a peninsula of some kind.
Yes.
Okay, so is there any symbolism? Do you feel like there could be a symbolism here, maybe?
I mean, for me, we have the uncontrollable waves there that the man can just simply not do anything about. She has died, and the sea goes on forever, though.
Right.
I mean, I could see that, you know, the feelings or the energy between them could be seemingly eternal as well.
So this was a perfect example and of art critique. Okay, what is it, and do you like it? So you immediately you knew you liked it. So that's great. That's successful. But the question is, like, does the painting work, or does the artwork work? You know, if it's a song, film, whatever, this happens to be a painting. So there's a relationship between understanding what it is and you're liking it. And the fascinating thing about art here is that you are interpreting the art. You are creating the meaning based on the information the artist gave you. So that this questioning strategy of what is it to do you like it is the path through which you create the meaning. So you assume that she's dead. You see that this kind of peninsula ends sort of abruptly, and then it's in this kind of angry ocean with the waves splashing. There's enough information there for you to piece together the meaning. So that's the beauty of art. That in a sense is what art is in some level, is that it's about meaning making. You develop a relationship with the artwork. So that, I feel, is like a really wonderful experience and a wonderful example. I want to take Joshua on the same trip. So Josh, what is it, and do you like it?
What the fuck, man? Why did you give me the hard one?
You're the high intellect. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my gosh. I do like it.
How about this one? What is it? And
No.
All right, let me. Maybe this one. How about that one?
Let's go with the one before. Let's
okay. All right.
I'm curious. Well, I do like it because it's bizarre and it's grotesque.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? It's a painting, or actually, maybe it could be a drawing. I'm not sure. It looks like
yeah, and again, like you're talking to someone who can't see it. Imagine you're explaining it, say, over the phone. So
yeah,
a bit from there.
Maybe it's colored pencil. Probably not a painting, but it looks like this vague space, kind of undefined, probably not anywhere on Earth. And it's a bunch of disembodied heads that not just faces, but human body parts. And then there are what look like, well, it's split into two screens. So you have some kind of like scenic mountain view on the right side. And then you have this like chessboard kind of, actually that's probably exactly what it is, right? It looks like a chessboard on the floor with human pieces or human body parts, kind of half human body part, half chess piece on the board. And then on the left side, you have like these murals, maybe, or not awning, but like the things you draw over a window that continue the image of the mountains. So I don't know. I think my description is about as weird as the actual thing itself.
Is it? What style of art is it? Surreal. Obviously, I just answered the question. I think that I'm just kind of helping you out. Softball there. But what's coming out of his mouth? What is the meaning of that?
It looks like tape or paper or something.
Yeah. Why are now? Let's say, is this a positive or a negative painting? Like, what kind of mood are you getting from it?
It's horror. I wouldn't say maybe negative, I suppose, but it does look like horror to me. It's like a Lovecraftian kind of terror.
Wow. So nightmarish is what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing conclusion, because this is a painting of a nightmare that I had.
Oh,
so Jesus. You actually did answer that. And I painted it trying to figure out the meaning of the nightmare, for myself. But I did embellish things, but I'm kind of I'm jumping ahead here. So obviously with this one, it's far more difficult to interpret. The artist is putting much more weight on your shoulders to figure it out. Like, what does that eyeball mean? I see that kind of the glass eye that looks broken in the background. It's kind of pinkish with the blue. So it's, well, eyes symbolize. What do eyes symbolize? What could an eye symbolize?
Well, I suppose a lot of things.
Vision, sight, understanding, these sorts of things, So I'm kind of grabbing the torch here because I put you on the spot here with this one. So anyway, and then if you look at the figure on the left with the sort of green and red face, he has no eyes. So there's certain kinds of, and even the breasts look like eyes in a sort of way. The eye in this figure is twisted all the way around backwards and looking inward, sort of where the brain would be. And his face is kind of, it almost melds with the landscape here. So there's very many levels of meaning here. It's highly interpretive. It's much harder to make sense of. But at the same time, the more you work on it, the more you give to it, the more you interpret it, the greater your experience of it, the deeper your relationship becomes with it. So I don't want to take you, too far down that road. Maybe I'll give you something lighter. How about that one? No, but anyway, yeah. So these are just approaches to looking at it. And of course, you have simple things like this, which is just a simple portrait. You've got graphic design, you have abstract art. This could just behave as like, well, it's aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't really have a meaning to it. So anyway, I feel like these are important discussions. It's important to think through, like, to be able to distinguish between different kinds of art and then have some sense of a language about approaching it. But let me move on. Did you guys think that was valuable? Was that helpful in any way?
You totally wasted my time, bro.
Oh, geez. I love your honesty. That's very refreshing.
Although I am curious though, what did that painting mean to you, or that drawing mean to you? Well, you had done all that. What did you get out of it?
By telling you that, I rob you of the experience of interpreting it. But I will tell you. But do you see where I'm going? Like, a painting, just like a song or a film, should not need the artist to stand there and explain it to you, right? And this is part of what's alienating about the art world as it is today, is that we on the right, we feel alienated by the arts. It's like, what does this mean? I don't get it. It's stupid. It's weird. I could do that. It's conceptual to the point where, like it's like a one-liner gag or something, or it just doesn't seem to make any sense at all. So we should, on the right, kind of like leave that alone, walk away from that, and allow ourselves to approach a work of art the way we would approach, say, a book by Nietzsche or any great philosopher, where, okay, these are hard ideas to understand, but I'm going to fight my way through this and I'm going to figure it out, So for me, in that case, the painting had to do with some personal, intimate stuff, some regrets about relationships, about the notion of like life and death. Like in dreams, we don't know what's real, but in life, sometimes we don't know what's real. You see, and so there's this kind of vague, there's like a blurred line in between life and dreams. And I think I was trying to express that in that painting. And then death is a big theme in it as well.
Well, the painting kind of reminded me of, again, a lot of people on the right really, they equate macabre art with just being crap. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, well, I didn't immediately understand it, therefore this thing was completely meaningless, right? But the artist, a good artist, is trying to explore either themselves or society through this art, because, again, this goes back to what Josh was talking to with, like, you have the critiquing type brain, and then you have the creative, and they come to conclusions completely differently. I mean, myself, I can read all the philosophy books I want. Films and books and things and like fiction literature and things like that really tie the ideas together for me, and that's how I absorb it best. Andrei Tarkovsky has a film that is called The Mirror, and it's probably his most elusive yet most interesting film. It's his most personal film by far, and the narrative is there's not really a narrative structure there. It's completely all over the place. It was very confusing to a lot of people, and yet that didn't really matter. And you don't need an explanation of what these moments in the films and their relation to his own personal life. You don't really need that in order to feel something about that and relate it to your own personal experience or experiences that you've observed. So in like that thing, that image that you had Josh describe, and you're saying that's a nightmare, you as an artist are trying to explore what this could possibly mean in the way that works best for you. Right.
Beautifully said that. That was very, very on point. It was very on point. This amazingly flows into our next question perfectly. So, can art be meaningful, even if negative, while seemingly meaningless? So, that's, I guess I'll just pass it right back to you, Jerome.
So what I mean by that is, like, in general, especially modern pop culture, the more commercial type artworks, things like that are deemed as meaningless because they seem mindless. I would say that they're actually quite meaningful. So you have, so in my mind, you have, let's say, three tiers of art. And I'm sorry, everybody, to always drag it back to this, but film is my thing, so I'm going to speak to film.
That's totally fine.
So you have like the bottom tier, or I'll start at the top. You have the top tier, which are the filmmakers that strive for greatness, whether they succeed or not. They're striving for greatness. They're striving to really say something in a really interesting way that is truly groundbreaking for the medium. My own biases would point to someone like Lars von Trier, who no filmmaker is like whatsoever, even if you hate him. That's someone that's striving for greatness. Then you have, like, say, a middle tier. I'll use, for an example, Thomas Vinterberg, who's another Danish director. He actually just won Best Foreign Picture for his movie Another Round, starring Mads Mikkelsen. This is a guy that's, like, incapable of making a bad film, but none of them are groundbreaking, but they're all pretty good. And then you have the lower tier, which is like the more commercial stuff. That's where you're going to have Marvel movies, Meet the Parents, just whatever comedy Ben Stiller wants to be in, so on and so forth. Now, you might think that those are quite meaningless, but those are the ones that the most people are going to see the most often, right? And so it may not be meaningful to a lot of people, but especially if you're interested in symbol decoding and messaging and subliminal messaging, they watch those the most. Those are the ones that are training their brains the most.
Correct.
Or they might be seen mindless and meaningless to people like us. But I mean, those are really shaping the psyche of a lot of people. And then toss in other artistic mediums as well. And now you've completely changed the psyche of a population, or at least a good chunk of them, enough to create change for better or for worse. And while it's easy to slag off that bottom tier that I described, we need all three of those tiers. I mean, in my ideal society, we would still find it necessary to have that, for lack of a better word, commercialized art that's mainly for the masses and so on and so forth. Because it's just, what is it training those people to think like?
Right. So some people might say that art is elitist, and that, when I say art, I think everybody knows what I mean. Whereas the Marvel movies, for example, I would argue that superheroes are American mythology, just to some kind of an extent. And, it, like you say, it's reaching far, far, far more people. It's emboldening them. It's moralizing them. It's giving them, these kind of modern day gods to identify with through their fandom and whatever. It would be nice if it actually had a deeper meaning, in some regard, that kind of look back and say, like, the mythology of, say the Greeks or the Celts or etc., and that there were actual life lessons in there that we could apply, or that somehow or other it related to, say, the journey towards, manhood, going through that process, etc. So these days I'm leaning more towards this kind of like mass consumption art. I'm starting a publishing company. I'm involved in developing a comics company. As much as I hate to admit it, film is the most important kind of art form today, I guess, in terms of like its impact on the world. But anyway, let's get Josh's response to this question.
So the question was what again? I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, it's tough to keep track of all this. So, can art be meaningful even if negative while being seemingly meaningless? Which is it? Does it have an intense negative effect on our society, or does it lack all meaning and not matter? One of those leads to creation and the other does not. Jerome, if you want to help.
Art have meaning even if it seems negative and meaningless.
Jerome, you want to help him out a little bit with that one?
Yeah, I
just want to make sure that is that correct? Is that a good way to phrase it?
Yeah, and I think the better word might be impactful, or does it actually mean something in society at large, even though it's deemed as like mindless entertainment?
So, in other words, could a Marvel movie be a meaningful movie on like an artistic level?
So, obviously those mass-produced entertainment clearly is meaningful for the people that really buy into it. Like I remember when whatever the last big Avengers movie came out, people were like, oh, you saw all the reaction videos of people like losing their mind when, character X did this cool thing or character Y died or whatever. And oh my goodness, good business call.
Do you have to take that?
Yeah, I think I have to.
All right. Well, we'll take it from here. You go ahead and mute yourself, and we'll just kind of carry on. See, ladies and gentlemen, this is the action of live YouTube shows right here. We get to kind of go with the punches here. I just want to I'll take the mic here and say that being a comic book nerd and comic book illustrator, I personally do feel, now we're obviously focusing on Marvel Comics as an example, but I wouldn't say the same thing for, say, Meet the Fockers or any kind of, Adam Sandler film or any of that. That's just, that's just how to waste time. It's how to avoid focusing on the important questions of your life. It just gets worse and worse and worse. So I absolutely hate and despise sort of like pop culture. I think that's the dumbing down of America, all that kind of media entertainment. There's nothing art about it, but talking about mythology and tying it back into these like sort of art for the masses, I am going to advocate, much to my friend's dismay, that I do love these films. Now, I grew up reading these books, and I understand how some people would criticize them, but at the same time, these films are moralizing us more so than anything. America has no mythology. Yes, we do. We can reach back to ancient, Europe, and we can kind of go into our ethnic alcoves and, look at our real ancestry and our real mythology. But, there's still some energy here that's incredibly powerful. So if we could harness that and make it our own, that's what we need to do. So I'm trying to tie it all back into this question of how should the right wing be literate in the arts, and what kind of art should we be making and consuming? What's the relationship between our artists and other people in our sphere?
I could chime back in on that, so I apologize about the.
Fine.
It's clearly that stuff is very impactful to a large percentage of the audience that perceives it, that views it. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I hope I'm not repeating anything that was just said, because I didn't hear anything you guys were saying. But I think it has a lot to do with the lowering of the cultural IQ that something like Ant-Man or Black Panther has this extraordinary kind of transcendental effect on its audience. Guy Debord, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, in one of his books talks about how the moment you have a need for representation, then your culture is already dead. And I think it's so interesting that when you look at like these, like Black Panther, for example, it was hailed as a kind of this cultural touchstone because it was this major industry movie, huge budget that was almost entirely a Black cast, and it does say something about the African American experience, I guess, if I can comment on that as a white person, that their extreme need to be represented, to see images of themselves on screen, is a commentary on their profound, on the profound absence that they have as a self-concept, as a community, as a people with a supposedly, with a history or whatever. So, these types of films, I think, are so impactful precisely because the bar has been lowered so much, and because the authentic cultural experience, what does Joseph Campbell call them, elementary ethnic ideas or elementary folk ideas, those are no longer in existence. And so something like Captain Marvel or Iron Man or whatever, I'm trying to think of other big budget films, have this huge effect on the viewing audience because there's nothing there. I think from a right wing perspective, I think it's interesting to watch those movies. Mm-hmm. One, because it keeps you in touch with the normie, and I think it is worth excavating, even total gutter trash, to find something it says about the contemporary moment that it was created in.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that, Jerome, or should we move on?
I would just add that looking again at Marvel type films or other films that are aiming for just pure commercialization. I mean, if you look at Mark Brahman's REM theory type work, mm-hmm. you can use that to kind of try and decode the symbolism behind a lot of these films.
Yeah.
And at the very worst, you can at least think, okay, well, this is how we can reverse X, Y, and Z in these films so that it would be more for us. I mean, it's not some groundbreaking movie or, peak artistic greatness or anything like that, but still, this is how we can reverse the messaging.
I think at the very least, every single person in the right wing must be literate of racial esoteric moralization. REM, Mark Brahman's theory, REM theory. I wouldn't even call that a theory. It's a kind of a interpretive system for looking at the arts, religion, and mythology. Right. And it's once you learn it, oh my Lord, everything is so clear to you. It literally is like kind of leaving the matrix. But at the same time, it's also a curse because now you see it all. And I have a feeling that people do see these things, but they suppress it, or they don't fully. They're in a bit of a malaise. They don't fully connect the dots. They don't know why is why are they using Black people to play Shakespeare roles, or something of that nature. Just example, but. Right. And that's just topical. I mean, we're talking about the actual narratives here, and all the symbols in the narratives, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a literacy that we must attain. And I'm not talking about artists alone. I'm talking about everybody. So, but again, I do advocate our artists have that literacy as well. And so here's an interesting thing. To be a culture and a people, the artists and the people who enjoy the arts must have the same language, right? So, it could be a symbol language. It could relate to, our history, sort of aesthetic principles that you might see in art. There's so many things. So it's a very, very heavy responsibility that falls upon the artists in the White Art Collective and in our sphere to develop that language, which we're doing now. And then, but at the same time, we in the White Art Collective, we're kind of baffled at how not everybody is coming to us. We are, a kind of culture creators for you see. And so it's a reciprocal relationship. If I build a fire and I'm playing guitar and some people are hanging out and singing, come, I don't know if that's a good analogy, but like come to the concert, and bring your wine and bring a drum, or I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I'm just trying to say we're doing wonderful things. We have numerous shows in a week, and every single one of us is we're very different in our ways that we create art. So it's just producing a wonderful world. So the more that people can, intellects and just people who are casual observers of our culture, the more that they get involved in the White Art Collective and these events, etc., the more we co-author what the Imperium is. So that's quite a beautiful thing. So let me move on to the next question. How does one retain an audience to appreciate a different kind of art? So Jerome, could you expand that question a bit, please?
I'm sorry, I cut off from you.
It's okay. How does one retain an audience to appreciate a different kind of art?
I think I'm thinking more like, how to train people to actually appreciate art. I'll say this about the people that have a more of a mind for critique. I think that they make for good art consumers, which I'll be the first to say is a talent. I mean, I know people that are very intelligent. They couldn't, they can't paint or write a film or write a book or do any of those things. However, they really do understand good art, right? And one of the things that I'd like those people to do is to move away from just the negative critiques of art as a whole, and instead shift toward things that actually work more for us to bring light to that. So just like in the film critic world, for example, that's actually an easy way for people to move up the social status ladder in society. Being a film critic actually can make you an elite, to be honest. You can literally determine the fate of actual creators' works, right?
Yeah.
And I think the problem, you were talking about creating a language and how both parties kind of need to be on the same. I think the problem right now is they dictate the language while the creators don't get to. So that's a problem in itself, but I'm ranting. But I think those people can actually really help teach people how to appreciate art and what to look for if they moved away from just kind of scoffing at art as a whole and just everything's awful. And listen, there's a lot of great stuff still out there, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can pull from. There's also a lot of happy accidents that come from modern film that gets through, and you don't know how, and those are things to point at. We did on the ECL last year. We did a film called The Square from Ruben Östlund, who's a Swedish filmmaker, and that film is there's some heavy economic and racial overtones in that film that you would never really think would get through work, but I mean, it was fantastic. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. I mean, there's still good stuff being made, and I think it would help point people towards these works and others, so that way they can start feeling better about it, right?
Right. That's.
I mean, I ran it so long, I don't even remember what you really asked me. Oh, about training, like kind of training people how to appreciate art. I mean, I don't have an exact remedy for that.
Well, the question was talking about retaining an audience, and this is that was part of the question. This is an ongoing discussion within the White Art Collective. We have marketing meetings. We want to know how to engage people more. We are, I don't know how to explain this, like, even though we've been around 3 years, we have the whole world against us. We don't have millions and millions of dollars. We don't have like theaters across the world. We don't have like, stocks of actors and production people. And, we're just people like who are listening to this show, working out of our houses, making music, making paintings, making literature, making poetry, making YouTube shows, etc., D-Live shows. We're common people. You cannot get more underground than that, I guess, in that regard. So, we have some really staunch followers that are beautiful people and intelligent. I mean, they are the ones we should probably talk to, because it's amazing like how enriched they are. I mean, they're, and it's not as if like, oh, they have like PhDs in culture and arts or something like that. They don't know, the things I'm talking about, like, the systems of critiquing painting, for example. They're just good people. They're our people. They're on our side. And so I think the whole question of this, pretty much the entire show, is how to kind of shake everyone else out of that black pill malaise. Because so far in our culture, most of our shows are talk shows. They're political analysis shows. And I have to say, I feel, and I think you agree, that it's just black pilled the hell out of us. And that's a dead end. That's a dead end. And everybody's like, well, what's next? What's happening? Where's the freshness? And it's the White Art Collective. Now, like any kind, like a radio station or a museum, you're not going to like every song on the radio station you're playing. You're not going to like every painting in the museum you're visiting, or what have you, or every poem in the book you're looking at. But it's there, it's happening, and I think more engagement is what we're asking for. There's all kinds of marketing devices and things you can do. Again, I can't wait for the White Art Collective to make this huge announcement that's coming in about 2 weeks. But some of that maybe is more of a marketing question than a cultural question. I don't know, Josh, what's your take on this whole thing?
There's a lot there, actually. And as a quick sidebar, I was curious, Jerome, because you did bring up the question of the critic, the role the critic has. Do you think it's fair to say that maybe that relationship has inverted? Because it seems now like the industry, Hollywood, has expanded so much that critics are more fighting for access to studios and producers so that they can keep their careers, rather than critics being kingmakers. Now they're kind of sycophants just to stay in the industry. Do you feel like that shift is happening?
Maybe just the simple oversaturation of them. I mean, the fact that, before, when we had film critics in America, a film critic had to be in the newspaper, right? And eventually in the newspaper or on the TV. And now 5 million people on the internet can be film critics.
Yeah. There's no Siskel and Ebert anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he was
Leonard Maltin.
I mean, Ebert, like, I disagreed with him a lot of times, and sometimes I agreed with that. But he was a great film critic, though. I mean, he was really fantastic at his job. He understood art. We had some, and like, even if you have a difference in taste, I mean, he was good at what he did, and he actually wielded power over filmmakers. So yeah, you're probably right in that.
Yeah, I just thought that was it, especially with like the there's a whole industry of critique online that has kind of emerged to satisfy the audience's need to hate the material that comes out. So like all these, I don't know, I do want to get back to the question because I had a lot to say about that, but just like these different channels that like do 17-hour long dissections of the J.J. Abrams films, it's like it's a weird twist in that kind of social role. But to the original question, I think it's a big question. I think it's very complex. I think, it's a harder battle to achieve, I think, what Don and Jeff want to achieve 5 years after the peak of kind of like mainstream identitarian politics in America. It was very easy for the enthusiasm and excitement to be there 5-6 years ago when everyone felt like they were winning. Trump, all of the media attention that the alt-right was getting, things like that. And then fast forward 5-6 years later, this whole sphere has, I think, by and large, whole swaths of the viewing audience have disappeared. Creators have disappeared. And the people that are left are looking for therapy. And I think that makes it very difficult if you're trying to expand the reach of your network, if you're trying to capture new listeners, if you're trying to get the listeners you have to follow you in the direction that you're trying to take the network. I mean, that's just difficult in its own right. I think of like a long-running television series. Some of these shows lose their audience, and it's not anything to do with the quality of the program. It's just your show can't run for 11 consecutive years and retain an audience. People change, they grow, circumstances change, they lose that it factor that made them attractive in the first place.
Unless Simpsons, though, that's run a real long time, hasn't it?
Well, but that's so. It'd be interesting. I mean, no way they have the viewership that they did in 1994, all these years later. But yeah, I mean, but they were great for a very long time, and then at some point it became just like part of establishment culture, and like Saturday Night Live. Like at some point, it stops being it stops moving the culture forward and just becomes part of the hegemony. It just becomes a vehicle for disseminating like establishment ideals. The early Simpsons series was very transgressive and did all kinds of like really cutting edge shit. And once it just became, once its position in society was secure, and a lot of the writers had left, it stopped being edgy. And so, but to bring it back to the question at hand, like I think the issue for this community is that there's a kind of masochism in online right-wing politics that people need to exercise from their spirits if they want to improve what they get out of this community, if they want this community to be filled with better quality people, more insightful, creative types, more active political types. I think everyone needs to excise that masochistic tendency that they have. If you're going to somebody because you just want them to rip apart a Nancy Pelosi speech or a miscegenation ad or crack jokes about fellow whites or whatever, if it's about spite and resentment and being mollycoddled, then it's going to be really difficult to change things. Ultimately, the kind of people you want who are going to follow you, no matter how many different costumes you put on, that's a very small group of people. And from a marketing perspective, you have to ask yourself, are we going for a niche audience, the intelligent, sophisticated audience member who dispositionally is going to be open to new things? Then your reach is going to be consistent, but very limited. And if you're going for the big mass appeal, then there's going to be a high churn rate, because you're just going to lose people the moment you deviate from whatever they expect from you. So it's tough. The fundamental question is what kind of audience you want to have, I think.
Wow. That actually goes back to the beginning of what we were discussing, in critiquing art, like who is the art for? And there's no doubt that our art is for our people in terms of, I'm talking about the White Art Collective. There's a range, of like very explicitly pro-white or white positive art. And then just songs that are songs about our life and our experiences that, you can't really see a pro-white or an explicit political kind of message in it. But I think that this is an important decision for the White Art Collective, or as a collective, but also as individuals. And that's a complex topic in and of itself, because we have a really wonderful relationship with the collective where we're free, we're totally free, and we're encouraged to be ourselves as much as possible. But yet we gravitate to the collective. Oftentimes I would say we write for the collective. I mean, in a sense, we're writing for each other, the other artists and musicians. And when I say writing, I mean creating. And then, the audience, in a sense, gets to witness that. Like when I go on stage and I perform, I have an attitude where I think, you know what? I'm not performing. the audience is witnessing me playing my songs. In a sense, I'm in my mind, I'm just sitting in my room in my studio playing my guitar, but I'm doing it with full throttle. Now that's not entirely true. I know how to perform. I enjoy performing and making a show for, make it fun to watch or whatever. But you have to have that sense of, I'm in my creative space, but the audience is witnessing what it is I do. I'm not like a sort of juggling and riding a unicycle. I'm not making some goofy show. I'm making art. This is my soul that I'm projecting here. It's very serious to me, or to the artist when I say me. So anyway, a lot of fascinating topics here. Really, really important discussion. I think it's certainly, obviously, clearly important for the White Art Collective and all artists in our sphere, because more people come to us all the time. I should let you know that, like, we're growing. It's not like we're growing exponentially, but we are growing at a pretty steady rate. And when people find us and they, oh my God, I want to be a part of this. They might feel like, oh God, can I be a part of this? Am I good enough for whatever it is? But our arms are open. Please come in. I'm kind of jumping all over the place here. So let me get back to the questions. So the last question here is the importance of the artist and those that are truly art appreciators, which are just as necessary as the artist. So I guess the question is, how important is the artist and those and his relationship with his community or his followers, if you will? Jerome, could you kind of explicate that a little bit?
I think that was my own question, and hearing it back, I don't know if I fully understand it. Could you say it again?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just reading it straight off of what you wrote. So yeah, it's in the chat in the Twitter. I think what you were trying to ask was, what's the relationship between the artist and his audience or the community that we serve? Because I would certainly say I serve the white art, or rather the white positive community. I serve the right wing. I serve white people as a demographic that is being targeted for replacement. And I do that intentionally. I don't, I think that every artist has their own, they can call the shots for whatever it is they do. Some of us are more committed to that explicitly, and others, it's kind of a thing that, it's part of what they do, and that's obviously their prerogative. That's their right and their freedom. So, but do you know where we're going with this, Jerome?
As far as the artist and his relationship with the audience, I mean, that kind of, I think, can go to just what the purpose is for or what the reason is for the creation that this artist is doing. I don't have like a specific answer for that, because some create for others, some create for themselves, some create to just create, and so on and so forth, whatever. I do think that we are in a time where it is best if we have artists creating something that, there is a little specificity in some works as far as, who is it for? Like we were saying earlier, who is this art for? We have to have something that's for somebody, not just everybody. Right? Now, works that are very like self-exploratory can really serve that piece of work that you showed, Josh. That was your nightmare.
Yeah,
I would say that that's for anybody.
Yes.
Anybody on the planet, honestly. Because it's you exploring yourself, and then you present it. And then
beautifully said.
That's up to them to experience that however they will, right? And that's more than fine. But we do need to encourage others to actively create something that is for our race, right? I don't write for one specific person or one specific niche group. It's for my people as a whole, is who I want to influence and change for the better. So, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I mean, when I wrote those questions, I'm just kind of like ranting, going off, and going back. I'm like, I don't really know where to go for that. I don't really think there's one set answer there. I'm not sure.
Josh, what do you got to say?
There's a Joseph Campbell quote that comes to mind. I actually pulled it up. I'm going to read it here.
Okay.
There's a major difference, as I see it, between a shaman and a priest. A priest is a functionary of a social sort. The society worships certain deities in a certain way, and the priest becomes ordained as a functionary to carry out that ritual. The deity to whom he is devoted is a deity that was there before he came along. But the shaman's powers are symbolized in his own familiars, deities of his own personal experience. His authority comes out of a psychological experience, not a social ordination. And I think there's a certain kind of question as to whether the artist should serve, if Joseph Campbell is correct in saying this, just putting that aside, maybe you disagree. If he's correct, then maybe the question becomes, is the artist a shaman or a priest? Or does our artist of a future world representing our interests, the groups that we're talking about, that we're all speaking to, are they functionaries? Are they ritual keepers? Are they kind of maintaining the dogma, or are they shaman types? And they're kind of more future oriented. I kind of see that as being implicit in what Campbell is saying here, is that the priest is looking backward and the shaman is looking forward. The priest is a maintainer of an existing social order, and the shaman is kind of the more forward-looking, maybe even you could say subversive type. I use that word very delicately because I don't want to introduce the baggage that word carries into this conversation. But it seems to me that's the question: are artists shaman types, or are they priestly types? I would say, what is the relationship that our artists should have? Is they're to the future.
I really can speak to that a lot, but I don't want to cut you off. I apologize.
No, I more or less kind of got to my point. I'm curious why that resonates with you.
Oh my God, hugely, hugely. I first of all want to compliment you and thank you, because I think this is kind of the gold nugget that we were digging to get at in many ways here. And again, our audience, our people are witness to this, I'll say that I, as an artist, am both. I play both roles, I should say. I don't, not simultaneously. Okay, for example, my Monday live streams of my painting studio, I'm the priest, because I'm replicating a famous painting of the Roman Empire attacking a temple at Jerusalem. It's a historic painting, and I'm making it's a commission from a client friend who said, I want a copy of this painting. There's no way that he could buy the painting. It would be hundreds of millions of dollars. It's in some Italian museum somewhere that it's off limits. But to hire me to paint it, to make a replication of it, is doable. So as I do it, I am in a sense repeating the scriptures of the artwork. I'm ordained with my skills, my painting skills, and my brushes and my paints and my water and my tools, to have this ceremony of replicating this famous painting, this incredibly important and beautiful painting. And it's a colossal painting. It's an epic painting. It's taking me, weeks to finish this painting. And so, that's in a sense acting as a priest. It's a priestly role, because I'm showing the audience, this is a piece of art that is an important part of our history. It's an important part of our narrative, just like if we were to, go through sort of rituals that are part of a religion in some sense. Obviously, I'm stretching the analogy, but and people come to the show and they feel that, they love that. I kind of, I play a little music, I banter a little bit, I answer some chat questions. It's really chill. It's really nice, but it's the art. it's the process of watching me make the art that is kind of a sort of a religious experience, maybe. And I'll leave it up to the audience to comment on that. I'll kind of put that out there now, and maybe on my Monday shows, live streams, people can respond to this video. That'll be an interesting dialogue that we could get going. Whereas in my personal opinion, I feel that a true artist is a shaman. What is a shaman? They are a kind of, I hate this term like sorcerer or magician, because it's too Harry Potter, but like if we could pull it back to ancient times, it's a shaman is someone who communicates with the spirits, who communicates with perhaps the gods, and maybe the Oracle of Delphi, this kind of thing. And you become the medium through which some other force speaks. And we don't totally understand it, but it's real. And, our job in a sense is to have the skills to transcribe whatever it is that this inspiration is as it comes out in a painting, in a song, poem, etc. But also to get out of the damn way and let the inspiration speak in as loud as it can, in full clarity. So that's almost a meditative experience. Every individual is going to speak differently to that. They have their own process. How does Hyrith write a song versus how does Nullis write a poem? How does Jerome make a film versus how do I make a painting? They're quite different processes and different people, but all of us are channeling some powerful feeling that if we were to stop that and block that up, we'd go fucking mad. We would go fucking crazy. We would be deeply unhealthy. So that's the true nature of a real artist, is someone who has no choice but to let the spirits speak through them. And by the spirits, I guess I'm saying inspiration. Now, we're driven mad by the hell that we're living in, the insanity of living in this world where whites are inviting inviting their own destruction and defending the people that hate and want to kill them. That's talk about surreal. It's hell. It really, really is true, visceral, moment by moment hell to live in that, and we're living in it. And so as artists, you talk about therapy. This is therapy. We need therapy. And I don't like the word therapy in this context because, well, therapy is really for people who are damaged, right? And are we not being assaulted? Are we not psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, economically, culturally damaged by this crisis of white genocide, white replacement? Of course we are, right? So turn to your artist. Find your health, your love, your peace in our work, in our community. We are a community, so that's kind of, I think, the sort of the message and the purpose of this show is to talk through all those things that get people around, the blocks that they have, the mental blocks, the prejudices that they have about, well, art is, that's for hippies or that's for leftists or I don't understand it or, whatever. But granted, we do have our like fash wave and synth wave. We've got our memes. We do have art culture, kind of an online art culture, but there's so much more. That's just like the tip of the iceberg. So I don't know. Would you guys like to add any closing thoughts to this, Jerome? Because we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah. In regards to, what was it, Josh? That shaman and the priest?
Shaman and the priest. Yeah.
I mean, I don't really have any strong feeling either way. I mean, what I think an artist should do is, well, okay, so let me talk. I'll reference myself. The type of stuff that I would write 5 years ago is definitely different than what I would write today. All right. My ways of thinking has also changed, and some of my outlooks have also changed. I'm still me, but I have a bit of a different and a more solid kind of worldview, right? And so as an artist, you can take in all the tools that you possibly can in order to guide this somewhere, tools of the craft or structure and so on and whatever. But I don't really think the artist should be making like a decided, like taking on a decided role. I mean, they're kind of one of those or the other, I think, naturally. And depending on the kind of way their psyche or the way they think or whatever, that's going to kind of gear the art towards whichever direction. So I don't really have, that might sound boring, I don't really have a position on that, whether it's the priest or the shaman or what have you. I think, like Kent was saying, each artist operates completely differently from the other, and how they view things and where they pull from or what they look toward. And I don't know. I just I don't think it's that important for the artists themselves to. They shouldn't make that a decided effort. They should just really understand who they are, and then go from there. Either way, they'll be able to create something, and they have a role. I think it's more important for people to understand what their role is, or their capability, or what their instincts and natural talent kind of go toward, and not to fight that. Because then they're gonna, it might be something that was made with good intention, but it's going to be poor, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think they really need to just kind of like listen to themselves and what's always said in our sphere: become who you are. But it's true. You should really. That's really the way you should go about it. And some people will just naturally fit the shaman. Some people will naturally fit the priest.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So, on that, I think I would like to close out the show with a song. This is a song by our friend from Australia, Syntheside, rest in peace. He took parts of my interview on No White Guilt with Jason from The Great Order and Jason Kuna, and somehow magically transformed it into this really cool synthwave song. So I'll leave the audience with that. And we love you guys, love your people, love your movement, love yourself. Take care of yourself. Join in on our shows on DLive.com/White Art Collective. There's 3 or 4 shows a week. So there's so much going on. Definitely support the White People's Press, White People's Quarterly, and anybody and everyone around us who is doing white positive work. So on that note, I will say good night to you all. Postmodern art is really complete nihilism. It's strictly conceptual art. It's no longer about the medium or the art object, but the concept of it. The leftist ego pleasuring itself. It's how offensive and bizarre and unrelatable and alienating can we be in an adolescent rebellion of vulgarity and anti-art, mute in technique and neurotically feminist. They reward mediocrity and they lower the taste of culture. It's the corporate standard, and it's a canned art that can be reproduced over and over and over. Andy Warhol is the Antichrist of art, the poster child of postmodernism. The art world is run by the elite cultural mafia of so-called progressives. Its Warholian adherents traipsing around at vapid gallery openings, trying to create their 15 minutes of fame. Gallery owners paid off enjoy ego stroking and pandering from the wannabe artists that toe the line of the university professors' platitudes. Nothing could be less inclusive or farther from the spirit of art. Whoever controls the museums, the art history, the literature, they control how we see our own history. White artists must form their own media platforms, their own sales networks, their own cultural venues, never needing to qualify to the art world and its diversity quotas. We can no longer be oblivious to the cultural paradigm that wishes to replace us. And from this context, we must be conscious that white art is dissident art, for their activity threatens and destabilizes radical leftist establishments. Art in the alt-right has been primarily internet-based. These producers can take their works into real life, either through creating their own art venues or by guerrilla means. Return to the greatness of the West. Reflect your culture and what's going on around you. Our people need it. We need you badly.
Modern art is a conscious effort to psychologically beat down Western kind. To what extent can we still expect and understand artists to sometimes be rule breakers, pushing boundaries, challenging norms, asking uncomfortable questions, revealing hidden parts of society, even fringe or alternative lifestyles? What is the difference between exploration and subversion?
There's something really disturbing about the white voyeurism of Black or gay art forms.
We need to recreate our culture so that we can recreate a people out of our deracinated race,